we help consult when it comes to how to improve quality, or how you can scale better, or how you can reach more users. So anything that surrounds, let's say, the quality of a mobile app, and how to improve on that. We also help, funnily enough, move from native to React Native, but also from React Native to native. So there's a lot of those conversations going on lately, which I find quite interesting. I personally don't have a specific opinion, but we'll come to that later in this hour. And so that's me running this business and trying to make the most out of it. So it's a topic that I'm really interested in, and I believe I have a degree of experience. And I'm super excited to have Tris with us, because Tris also organized the NS London. So we have a bit of kind of community leadership, if not just mobile engineering leadership. So maybe Tris, do you want to introduce yourself very quickly as well?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Tris Bates, and I'm a huge mobile fan. I've been developing apps and working with mobile since I first bought the original iPhone back in 2007. I remember people at the time saying that would never take off, but here we are on a call talking about mobile and scaling teams nearly 20 years later. So it's exciting. I wear a couple of hats. So I work at NewDay in kind of a head of mobile role. So the idea there is I look after the mobile engineering teams. So we've got a brilliant set of engineers at NewDay. And for those that don't know, so NewDay build credit products for the UK market. We're quite big, so sort of roughly 20 to 30% of UK credit cards are NewDay cards. So we're kind of the ghostwriter credit cards, credit apps, and there's some unique challenges with mobile around that. So we've had over 5 million downloads, and we've got roughly 34 apps. So there's quite a lot of scale there. And then the other hat I wear is outside of NewDay, I help co-organize NS London. And so NS London is a iOS meetup group. It's been going now for about 10 years. Last year we did events at Apple, Google, and some other very high-profile companies, including NewDay. That's going really well. We've got roughly 3,000 members. Encouraging to go move forward, try and keep up with Carl. I think nearly 5,000 members for Lundroid. But yeah, we're a very big meetup communities and heavily involved with what best practice looks like and how to scale mobile. So very apt for this talk today.
Thank you, Tris. If you have any question as we go along, I'll kind of monitor the chat, and if relevant, I'll just ask. So we're gonna do this kind of conversational setup. Maybe we can start off. You mentioned you know, the challenges of mobile. So do you see any leadership challenges that are specific for mobile that you don't necessarily see for web or other teams, especially when you scale? Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, it's there's many different O'Reilly books on engineering leadership, and they come to mobile and go, that's a different topic, and they kind of shirt around it. It's what I found. I don't know if you found the same, Carl, but I think the differences are there's many different tech stacks within mobile. So obviously it's a mixture of managing Android engineers, iOS engineers, sometimes middleware engineers, got kind of mobile BFF engineers as an example. Also, it's a very visual build that you actually get feedback. So with web apps in production, you don't get customer reviews where they're giving you 1 star and trying to encourage you to improve. So yeah, it's very much in the forefront. If you look on the train on the way home, everyone's glancing at their phones. So mobile's got unique challenges in terms of it's not just an app you can hot reload on a web server. You've actually got to deal with external parties for approval, like Apple and Google, for example.
And maybe in terms of like leadership, like leading mobile teams within that, how do you see differences in leadership style? For instance, when you have to lead mobile engineers versus, again, web engineers, as another counter to that, like do you have any specific challenges that you see that are for mobile that are not in the leadership of those teams? Maybe it's
Yeah, so over the years, I've experimented with many different kind of team structures and patterns. I think the thing with mobile is there's so many facets to it and so many supported devices, unique environment bits that often you're having to structure your teams around the solution. So I tend to find running cross-functional teams where you have design, product, and the different Android and iOS engineers together gives the best result. But sometimes you have squads where it's the iOS chapter, Android chapter, and you can run it like that. So how you organize your teams around the apps and depending on the scale is quite interesting as a problem.
Maybe you could talk to us like how big are your teams at the moment? You mentioned chapters, so I suppose you have sizable amount of iOS and Android engineers.
Yeah, so current teams are managed, so we're roughly around 30 people, the mobile team at NewDay. Previously, it's been teams sort of upwards of 50 or more. But it really depends what kind of apps you're building as to how you structure your teams. So, for instance, at NewDay, we've got a brilliant setup of a mono repo, one code base. So actually building out features is quite straightforward. But in that sense, you're building one app that gets distributed out for different in different flavors. But for other clients, where perhaps in Novoda, for instance, you're managing teams where they're delivering different products or helping out different teams. It's not all the same product that's going out the door. So what I found works really well is platform support teams. So at NewDay, I've got a team dedicated to engineering improvements and kind of laying out the foundations for the other teams. So that's worked really well for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. Platform team for mobile. We've seen that a few times. I think it starts makes sense when you get maybe above 20, 25 engineers. I think
Yeah,
more than that in directions. I've also seen it the other way where people start implementing platform team when there are like only 10 engineers. And then suddenly like one engineer has 4 or 5 hats and it just gets a bit complicated or confusing, where you might arrange yourself around, let's say, the Android and the iOS team. But as you start scaling, you need to break them down to feature teams and then the platform teams that supports the feature teams. And that's always interesting when you have that moment of scale where you have to go from quite simple way of looking at your engineering structure, where it's, well, this is iOS, so this is the iOS team, and then you need to reorganize yourself. Have you seen, I'm not sure if you're working, you mentioned BFF, so that's backend for front end.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you done your own flavor of BFF? And maybe with that, do you have the backend team? Do they sit close to the mobile teams, like the engineers, or are they separated in terms of organization?
Yes, it's a great question. I can't go too much into detail, specifics our infrastructure for obvious reasons, I guess. But I guess the thing with BFFs is they help you abstract other services you're building to make them more mobile friendly and help mobile teams deliver faster. I think that works really well when you're scaling up and you perhaps don't have a lot of trust in the APIs. But as you progress, I think it's interesting that obviously if you own the APIs, then really what I find works better is more of a gateway strategy, where you have a gateway in front of APIs and the APIs are designed to be consumed. Normally, if you have to put a BFF, there's normally a smell that something else isn't working correctly. So.
That's interesting. Are you saying that because you have, let's say, other APIs that are external to NewDay? Is that
not in this case, so they're internal, but if you imagine that we have a 300 plus engineering team, so we've got quite a lot of change going through, and that change, in order to accelerate that, you need that BFF in the middle there.
Interesting. Maybe to following up on that, maybe to Alex's point, the question I asked when we connected, which I thought was very interesting. I'm not sure if is your team distributed, or is it all in London, or your remote team? And then
we're mostly in London, but we've also got nearshore engineers based in Europe.
And to his question is like, how do you promote, let's say, cross-pollination between teams? On that point, I remember having a conversation with a CTO once, discussing cross-platform, and said, look, my Android team doesn't even talk to my iOS team, let alone to the backend team. and I feel that, you know, choosing a technology might help there. This is like if you force basically the communication, maybe you can talk to that subject. I mean, not necessarily cross-platform, we will touch that a bit later, but how do you promote the team to talk to each other, ensure that they're not siloed?
Yeah. This is where like structure is absolutely critical. So previous projects I've worked on in the past, we've tried, you know, you've got an iOS team, Android team, and then you've got an app you're delivering. And then what happens is you get close to delivering it, the features don't match, the behavior doesn't match. And then that obviously makes the argument for cross-platform in that case. But I find having guilds and other forums running alongside the teams really helps. So at NewDay, we've got a great team where they have we have a team of Android and iOS engineers, but they're in squads. And then we've got this platform support team interacting with that as well.
Maybe there's a question, feature teams over platform teams. I think I found the term platform very confusing.
Mobile platform.
So I think in this, the way that we discuss it here is more it's not platform as in iOS and Android. We talk about a supporting team. Yeah, so that kind of does the tooling, testing. Is that correct?
So the way I look at it, so again, it depends on the scale. Obviously, here we're talking about 30, but we might talk about bigger teams where they're in the sort of hundreds. But what the team we've got, as platform support team, does is it lays out the foundations for the feature squads. So you've got a mixture of both. So feature squads are working on their features. So that's a combination of enhancements and engineering improvements. But the platform support team lay out foundations that all of the teams can use. So an example of that might be bringing in a design system, doing major CI/CD work, laying out those systems, where it's something that the whole team's going to benefit from. And if you don't have that, the problem is it's just feature delivery. And then those feature teams never go faster because they've not got the tooling, they've not got the right systems to make them faster. So yeah, I think a model of the two works best at the sort of, I don't know, 30 to 50 scale.
Interesting. Maybe we can shift on measurement, because you touched on that.
Sure.
It's not planned like this.
Right, no worries.
I remember doing this presentation at a conference in the US around like the challenges of engineering leaders like CTOs and similar, because you have the DORA metrics that came out from Google and say, okay, this is how you measure engineering efficiency, and then you hit mobile, in which those metrics doesn't really fit. How do you measure the performances of your mobile engineers, or like the teams? How do you make sure that you're as efficient as you can get?
It's a very good question, and every topic I ever see above CTOs or VP, it's always around velocity and metrics. So I think a combination of DORA and space is probably the right solution. I think mobile engineering is still software engineering. It's still code. It's still code that gets committed and deployed. Yes, it's different platforms. Yes, there's other edge cases and extra bits to think about, but it is still code. So what I normally suggest is adapting DORA. So the deployment frequency is a combination of your middleware componentry, if you have it, but also the app's submissions to store, effectively upload to store. At that point, that's a deployment. And you can measure that, you know, if you're not doing a weekly release or a nightly release, you can see when that falls. You've got some guardrails around that. And then meantime to recovery, you'd also put in there, you know, obviously crashes and responding to crash data, which would be the extra bits that mobile has. But what really excites me is space, and kind of, if you frame it around developer experience and what developers want, you're more likely to get buy-in from the engineers, and it's not just something that execs use, you know. So that'd be happiness with tooling and measuring that, and that's something we discuss a lot at NewDay. But also cycle times within PR processes. You know, how long does it take you to, raise a PR, do the code and close it. But the key bit around that is not beat the developers if they're taking too long. It's, are they actually following feature branching strategy where they're doing that? If they're not, then you won't see those cycle times, as an example.
And you're actively measuring that at the moment, yeah?
Yeah, we are, yeah.
And do you is that across the engineering departments, or do you do cycle time, let's say, between, let's say, web or backend and mobile, or?
Well, we're still very much experimenting with it and rolling it out, I think, as many companies are. But it's really exciting that we're doing that at the moment, and we've got some people on this call that are really driving those initiatives through as well at NewDay, which is exciting.
Yeah, I always find, like, what I've seen at least is you always have the kind of mobile team that sits on the side of the kind of engineering efforts, and I always found that a bit I won't say problematic, but challenging, because you want better integration between, let's say, all teams within your organization. And if you don't even measure the same thing, then you kind of build, raft between the two parties, like between the mobile and backend and similar. Actually, I remember in one way that when we worked at SoundCloud, they had the BFF, not back and for front end. Actually, they called it best friend forever. But you could, like, the idea was that the mobile team could deploy a new service, a new API. So, like, the BFF was basically this wrapper around all their backend services. And if you build a new UI, let's say you wanted to get the top 10 tracks from all your friends, and in order to achieve that, they would just wrap things up, and then this BFF tooling, it will give them like a new API endpoint, and then they can build their UI against this API endpoint, and then they would tag the backend team saying this is what we're doing, and so they have this kind of ability to work in a close knitted way with the backend team, which I've never seen elsewhere. I thought that this was really interesting, especially when you want to work closer together, because in each pull request you had to basically tag the other team and get their thumbs up as well. So it forces like the different teams to work together, or at least be knowledgeable of what's happening somewhere else. That was quite interesting.
One of the ways you can also do that, which is quite interesting, obviously, so once you've got those systems, we heavily leverage open API spec to native code generation. So service exposes an API, and then we can generate native Swift and Kotlin objects that you stick in your app, and you generate the network layer on the fly. But what that means is if that contract changes, you can break it at that point, and then you can see it breaks in UAT, and then you're not rolling it out to production, or you can adapt your app from there. Have you thought about
that? Is that the BFF generating the how to access the API? Is that correct?
Yeah.
I thought that's an interesting way. I've always found myself wondering what's the barrier. Sometimes you have organizations where in their mind, as soon as it hits the internet, it's not their problem anymore. Do you see what I say? So it's like, it's outside of my cloud infrastructure, so it's not my team, or at least a backend team. And then it's like, well, here's my contract, it's a JSON. And I always found that the abstraction of saying, okay, well, we need to do JSON parsing and HTTP clients and all those on mobile is the wrong layer of abstraction. Kind of reinvent the wheel, especially for us as an agency. We've seen this so many times. We spend millions on just writing JSON parsers and HTTP clients. I'm quite happy to see it move, to see more of that move, where you have, as much as, when you deliver the ownership of the stability of an API, for instance, rests with the team that pushes it out. I think it should be the same, as the access to that should remain also with the engineers that kind of releases that. If there's one, I mean, again, on measurement, maybe like if there's one measure you would recommend on the efficiency of your team, what would that be?
So I mean, one of the things we do with the current teams is measuring around store reviews. So we're always aiming to hit 4.7, 4.8 average star rating across the apps. And that's having one metric you can drive around is quite good. Also crash rate, aiming for 100%, 99.99% crash free. Those are good KPIs to work around. And they're unique to mobile as well, which I find helps.
That's interesting. So like just the ratings on the store, you're monitoring that very closely.
Yes, we've got integrations with the services, so you'll get alerts when you get a new app review and ratings.
There's a question around NPS. Did you measure that as well or not?
NPS.
Net promoter score. Would somebody recommend your app to someone else?
We've got all sorts of measurements we do with NES and everything else. Across the business.
There's another question I'm just going through. Please.
Cool.
So, what are the key metrics you monitor apart from crash rates? Are there other ones that you look at?
Yeah, in terms of what live metrics or like software development metrics?
I think this is probably live metrics. I reckon live metrics. Yeah.
Live metrics. We also look at app size. So, for instance, for NewDay's apps, we're some of the smallest in the business, which is the goal is to be small in terms of file size. So I think there's some UK fintechs I won't name where they're around 500 megabytes for the app, which half a gig for an app is a lot. And obviously they're storing and caching data as well. Whereas I think for us, most iOS brands are sort of 60 megabytes. As an example, Android's around 20. There was a study done a few years ago that you can lose a lot of customers for something simple as that. People don't have a lot of free space on their phone anymore, and that download barrier also impacts a loss of customers.
Yeah, we worked also with a customer that had that released in Africa and other parts of the world, and where data has a cost, and so the smaller the better. And similarly, if you update weekly, it's problematic. So it's kind of like better to have it once a month and similar.
Yeah. Also, I guess measuring just availability. How often your app's in maintenance mode. How many good BFF services are available? Obviously you're aiming for near 100% for that as well. How many incidents did you have? All those kind of things.
There's another question here from Angelos. How do you monitor mobile app crashing? Do you have any specific tools that you use?
Yeah, so I think the gold standard was Crashlytics, which has been acquired by Google. But Firebase release monitoring, which we've been playing with recently, is really nice. It's all consolidated. You can look at a specific version of the app and know if it's healthy or not. I also like looking through Google Play Console because it shows you ANRs, so app not responsive. You see where your app's freezing in production, but perhaps there's not data around it. So yeah, that's what my sort of go-tos.
There's quite a few questions around, but I'm quite curious on one on kind of investment and resource in mobile. Especially there was a question around like how do you push for budget?
Okay.
Yeah. Is there? I mean, you mentioned your engineering team overall is 300 plus, and you're about 30-40 in your mobile engineering team. It's like 10%, I suppose, of your engineering team.
Something like that, yeah.
I mean that's quite good. Do you consider yourself mobile first, or?
That's interesting. Yeah. So people I speak to, NewDay, they kind of call mobile it's the shop front of all the APIs. It's also the tip of the iceberg. So it's the bit of your company that lives in people's pockets, no matter what company you are. Yeah, apps absolutely critical. It is, even if I talk to my daughter, she's absolutely glued to her phone. I think as are most people, checking their screen time for the day. So yeah, mobile is extremely exciting, and it should be invested more. I also think some companies are changing how they invest. So in the past, there were lots more agencies and building digital agencies building apps for people. I see quite a large movement over the last 5 or 6 years to bring it in-house. So a lot of companies doing it in-house because they want their product team to have direct access to developers and improvements.
So I have one question, but I think you're gonna seem to be inclined to answer yes here. But do you still think that mobile has a competitive edge that is a differentiator for businesses, like to have a really good mobile app?
Yeah, I think it's essential as well. If you look at some of the bigger companies like Uber, there isn't really a website where you book taxis. The entire product navigates around that. The same with Bumble and Monzo and other enormous brands. So I think companies that have chosen to go all in on mobile first as an approach have reaped the rewards, but customers expect a high level of polish and finish as well.
And how would you, let's say, how would you pitch that to the CTOs, like to kind of increase investment in mobile? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's interesting given the audience. Yeah. So, yeah, I think investing in mobile, but also being quite intentional with it. I think gathering metrics, performance data around how your apps are used and working off that data is quite critical. Otherwise, you can't see the value it's giving. So I'm often looking through kind of retention funnels, other analytics to kind of see where customers are dropping off, how they're using the apps. And then you do it like that. What you don't want to do is just get a team just to build something and say, well, hopefully this works as part of our strategy. You need to be iterating and driving around the data.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just trying to work out my thoughts here around.
That's okay.
I definitely seen a shift through the years. You're probably correct when it comes to like building teams in house. I've seen a lot of that. I mean, especially compared to say 15 years ago. But I also seen a reduction in the investment in the kind of mobile teams. I mean, maybe it's just like this Gen AI coming and investment in SecOps and other stuff. I always found it interesting to see how businesses that we talk to, like their intention on investing in the mobile capabilities. And going back to the point that you mentioned before on measuring success with the scoring, we had a lot of customers that came to us because, let's say, they're underinvested, so the app scoring were pretty low, and then suddenly it became a important factor for the business to increase on that, and then suddenly they doubled the investment in the mobile capabilities and got them back to, let's say, 4.5 and plus. Yeah, so maybe we can talk around cross-platform if
Your favorite topic, Carl. Favorite topic.
I always found this is like the one topic that constantly, surface. And maybe we can take the angle of, do you believe that, let's say, cross-platform technologies help get the team to work closer together?
Yeah, you know what I'm going to pull out. I'm going to pull out the Airbnb story. That's the first one.
You can summarize it for the audience if you're not familiar.
Yeah, sure I can. So normally there's a couple of stories over the years where people have done cross-platform and kind of moved away from it. But I think part of it is, in my experience, it's kind of a standard CTO playbook to say these two teams are doing similar things. Let's do cross-platform. Let's write once and deploy everywhere, which I think it's been the dream since the 80s or even before, in terms of cross-platform. One of the problems there with Airbnb found is they went in, to build cross-platform with the aim of having one code base, but they ended up with 3. And one of the things I've noticed is actually recruiting talent, if you need Flutter developers, so Dart programmers or React Native, they're actually quite hard to find now. And for obviously day rates are much more expensive than say a native equivalent. So you're putting your app in the hand and your future in the hands of companies that don't traditionally keep technologies for a long time. So, you know, obviously Google are quite infamous for that, kind of repeatedly moving away from technologies. So yeah, so Airbnb wrote their entire app in React Native. They launched it, and then they found that the performance of the app, the maintainability of the app, just getting features out, it was actually slowing them down. So they made the quite critical decision of going back and rewriting the whole thing natively. And that's something I've experienced again and again, you know, clients coming in saying, we built this in React Native, we want to move away. It's very rare I see it the other way around. And part of the problem is just getting support. If you have a problem with your Swift code base or your Kotlin code base, you know, one quick search on Stack Overflow and you've got the answer. But that's not so much the case if you're trying to find out a specific bit of JavaScript shimming you need to do to fix React Native code base. So
that's interesting. I mean, like my experience that I think is on the look when you choose. I mean, you're correct in terms of recruiting is a really important factor. We did a few gigs in which the aim was just to answer which cross-platform to choose, and it was like the only thing that they told us, like, we do not want to go native, but we're not sure if it's React Native, Flutter, or KMP, Kotlin multi-platform. And so we kind of went away, and I think for each business has its own requirements. In this case, for instance, they acquired 8 different businesses, and each business had their own stack. You can understand where it's like, okay, it gets confusing here. You need to align. They're like this big push for microservices in the back end, and they just wanted to have like one platform for the front end. But in my experience, one factor that matters is the size of the engineering team.
yeah.
See, like if you're 30, 40 people or 40 engineers, I mean, that's my opinion. I cannot really say it's based on data points, but it doesn't really matter which technology you choose because you have enough capabilities to basically solve it if culturally you have adopted it. So, and you see, then at that point, if you had that amount of engineer choosing a cross-platform technology, let's say like React Native, what's the aim there? It's not cost, really, because at some point, it's not because you try to write once. You see, like it's not because you have like one engineer that could be 2 engineers. You're sizable enough in the investment that's not a good argument. Then it tends to be culturally. I found it's like, okay, well, we have very strong web capability, and we want to align our backend and front end team.
Yeah.
And so we choose the technology that will align that.
Normally, if you say you are a team and you're around 20 people and you are looking to go, well, actually, I want to go cross-platform. I know some major companies have done that last year. I think also you need to attain the talent as well. You know, if you imagine, well, even as you see with Droidcon, right, there's 5,000 engineers in a room extremely passionate about native development for Kotlin. You won't have so much problems finding that resource. But I do think there are cases where cross-platform is good. And that would be, as you said, if it's a very small team, if you're not sure if the product's going to take off and you don't want to put the investment in there for that. So if you're building an app, say for the World Cup or, you know, a specific event or short space in time, I think cross-platform has a use there because you don't want to do all the investment. And then you can take that gamble on the technology because it's not going to be changing every year. You might not do updates after a year, as an example.
That's interesting. We have some quite interesting question popping up.
Okay. I'm trying not to get distracted by the questions. So
I mean, one aspiring CTO asked, like, they plan to scale and they want to build first in web,
okay,
and then scale into mobile. what would be the best approach you reckon, to do that? And is there something that you think is a good approach if you're starting off from zero? Do you see, like, if you have to build a new venture, and you have, of course, if it's probably too costly to do web, iOS, Android, like as you kick off something, what would be your strategy there? That's a quite interesting question that I get sometimes.
But it is important to have a presence in the store. So however you built your app, having an app, customers trust apps, and I think they offer a better user experience. What my suggestion would be, so Apple and Google have amazing WebKit web frameworks. They have great JavaScript bridges as well, but the platforms have a lot of rules around minimum functionality. So Apple, for example, have guideline 4.2, but basically don't wrap a website in a native app and ship it. And I've seen lots of companies get rejected for that. So what I would suggest is making the fringe journeys, so the journeys that customers aren't always doing, not native as a first start if you're trying to build it out. So perhaps you make sure that login is native, great user experience, your landing page is native, all the navigation's native, but then perhaps journeys that you kick out to are web viewed in. That's a good strategy. And then you can iterate and you can see the data. Customers are using this feature. Great, let's make that native. But only 2% of customers are using this journey. Let's not do that. So a good example of that is the Facebook app. If you go into Facebook and try and delete your account, that's a web view when you get to that screen because it's a probably 0.2% user journey. And they don't want to be developing out that much. So yeah, primary journey is native, secondary journeys web, and then scale it around that. But you could also mix the two together. So a good example would be in the good old days of Apple iMessage bubbles. They're actually web views in the early versions of iOS, as an example. So you can mix and match content as well. Or you can put a lot of your content in CMS as well, so you can pull it down.
Yeah, the mixing web views into your app, I've seen that quite a lot. I mean, I found it to be as you mentioned, is probably a good strategy when you start off and like the kind of by default have a fallback into web, and then you slowly build up your capabilities as, I guess, investment come in and you kind of realize that the journey that are the most valuable. There's some comment, I'm not going to name the app. in the chat.
It's also, there's a lot of press at the moment around lots of banking apps doing disaster recovery in their apps using web views. So you feature toggle on a web view, say there's a problem with the native journey, and you can switch to the web product in the app. That's another option as well.
Interesting. And did you do a lot? I mean, have you experienced with, let's say, hooking into the web experience back into native?
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways of doing it. So obviously you could do native WebKit web view integration, and you can have a JavaScript bridge. That means the web app can pass data to the mobile app and vice versa. Both Google and Apple support a framework called JavaScript Core, where you can actually build objects that you pass between web and mobile. That's a great strategy if you're looking to share data. But some of it's just basic. So you can create shared process pools. So your web view instance and the cache and everything is shared across different iOS and Android screens. And the other thing is obviously choosing what kind of web view. So there's a basic web view where it would fit in with some native navigation. But you can also do what's called a web, so I guess in iOS sense, it's a Safari view controller. So what that is it's a slimmed down version of the mobile browser. And the advantage that has is it has access to the external cookies from the web browser. So you can offer a more streamlined login experience. So that's, if you go into the YouTube app, that's what they use to kind of piggyback onto your Google session to log you in. So yeah, there's some cool stuff there.
And maybe like looking into the future, do you see any instance where maybe like, let's say, mobile development being in Swift or Kotlin leaks into the web. I was reading some WebAssembly, like Swift can compile down to WebAssembly and similar with Kotlin. Do you have any thoughts as what the future might look like for, let's say, web and mobile development generally, to get maybe more alignment there, or any opinion?
That's a great question. Web and mobile. I think the amount of people I spoke to over the years where they say, "Oh, native apps are just a flash in the pan thing. They won't be around forever. Web's going to take off. This new version of web's going to be even better." Uh, Unfortunately, I don't see them aligning on languages. I also don't also see, mobile operating systems aligning on languages at the moment, which is a shame, really, because people need to learn two languages, or three in this case. But there's also the problem of it's not really about the languages; it's the frameworks. So if you're an iOS developer, it's not the fact you know Swift, and for Android, it's not the fact you know Kotlin. It's all the frameworks. So what would be great is if the two companies could join up and actually tackle that together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also found that, as you mentioned, it's not the language. There's the framework differences, but there's also the behavior of the users that differ. And so when you try to, if you oversimplify and say, okay, it's just a language and let's build this in React Native, but even in the web view setup, we have yet one experience. The challenge is that you probably miss out on the subtleties of being an Android user or a web user or an iOS user. And so you'll have a subpar experience, which is okay, I think, if you start off, but as you scale up and you need to be much more precise in terms of delivering an experience that your consumer loves, it gets harder and harder. Maybe just touching like on Chandri's question, do you have any, if you have loads of platforms and you mentioned there's differences in framework and similar, what's the best strategy in your view to align on that, like to have at least some semblance of similarities between the teams, if it's so different on delivering, let's say, for iOS, and also different?
Yeah, so feature squad alignment is quite important. So it's quite important that the feature squad are working on the same features at the same time. The roadmap is delivering features, and it's not 1 month one team's delivering it. So you need feature parity between teams. And then that means you've got one refinement session to go through and talk about what you're building. You build it, you've got two cross-functional teams. The quality assurance team are testing them side by side. You're building acceptance criteria and the tests at the same time. And when you roll it out, you're monitoring it at the same time. So that delivers consistent results in my experience. But I have seen the opposite, where no, we have to have an iOS team. It has to be completely separate in an ivory tower, and then the screens don't match up. The navigation doesn't match up. A classic one is the error handling isn't the same. So a backend changes the field to return a null or a different string format, and one platform falls over but not the other. So yeah, aligning the squads and the people around delivering it, for me, is the way to fix that.
Yeah, I recognize that. I think we had this in one project. We tried to have the Android team to merge the iOS code, and the iOS code be merged by the Android team, for that specific reason, like to align. Even when you have objects and they differ in name, which I found so ridiculous sometimes. It's the same thing, but one platform decided on one name and then the other platform decided on another name. It's like, doesn't make sense, makes it harder to cross-pollinate. We're coming into the hour, and this has been a fascinating conversation. Maybe we can open the conversation a bit more. If people have questions, please maybe raise your hand. Or how do we do this, Barry?
Yeah, absolutely. Raising hands, probably a good way if people can do that, or just unmute the mic and come forward.
This has been. Does anyone have any question for Tris or myself?
Just one question, Tristan.
Yeah, sure.
Very interesting talk so far. So I just wanted to ask if you've ever been in a position to build a cross-platform piece of software that also includes a desktop, and what are the sort of challenges that you faced with that?
My team were talking about that this week. It happens. So by desktop, you mean Windows
Mac and
and Mac
Windows.
OS as an
Yeah,
example?
Windows and Mac, essentially, yes.
Yeah. That requires a completely different strategy, but I have seen companies over the years that have done it successfully. So good example of that would be Microsoft with their Office suite and Spotify. And their strategy is to have SDKs of all the business logic in C++ and other more portable languages. So basically the UI is native to the app, the underlying logic or the algorithms that is in a shared language. And Google also did that with, I believe, Google Analytics SDKs and other SDKs where they write in, I think it was Objective C++, which is a very fringely used language, but I've seen that as well. That works really well because then you can port it to all sorts of platforms. Does that answer your question, or was that? Oh, cool.
Yeah, it does. And I have a mate of mine who's actually trying to build a secure messaging app, and he started with KMP for both
Yeah, of course, yeah.
iOS and the desktop. And then the mobile side of things went really well until he had problems with the desktop. And interestingly, it was with Mac because he wanted to, well, the client required him to deploy both installables or artifacts for both Intel and the M series. And on the Play Store, it doesn't allow you to install two different binaries. You can only install one. And once you go with one, then you can't target the other. And what he's trying to do now is to rewrite the entire desktop app in Rust, hoping that he can bypass that particular issue and just generate one fat binary, which actually would be even scaled down in size. And it's a very roundabout way of going about things. But I sense that because we were talking about, some of the limitations with React Native, with speed, and then I would say maybe some of the limitations with KMP are, some of these issues, as I've just mentioned, there just might be a different approach to solving things with something like Rust. But yes, all of these frameworks do have their little bottlenecks. And
yeah, KMP is a great example of technology that's really showing off it in the industry at the moment. Octopus Energy did a talk I went to about a year or so ago where they talked about their strategy, and they're supporting Android, iOS, and also supporting embedded appliances. And by using KMP, that really worked for them because they could have their little gas usage monitoring device that you get shipped to your house, but also an Android app and an iOS app, and presumably desktop apps if they wanted to as well. So, yeah, good point.
I mean, all the KMP projects that I've been on, quite a number of them, and they've all been successful, but that's only been when they've targeted just the desktop. And then the moment you try to use KMP for web with JavaScript, and then it starts to fall on its face. And with desktop, if you're not doing too many complicated things, yes, it's fine. And if you're only targeting just one of the Mac series, then yeah, you'll be fine. But yeah, it's got its limitations. But yeah, thank you so much for that.
No worries. It's worth also highlighting, so by default, iPad OS apps, so for Apple platforms, are installable on Apple Silicon Macs. And if you don't want to do that, there's Catalyst frameworks for doing it as well. So I've seen lots of talks where people talk about just ticking a box and they've got it on Mac OS or Vision OS.
Catalyst framework, you said?
Yeah, Catalyst framework, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we're coming to the end of the hour. There's a slightly controversial question there in the chat. I'm a CTO. Do I still need a mobile engineering team? Why can't I just have one head of engineering with some generative AI tools to create mobile apps?
Yeah, Carol, it's Steve. I've come off mute. So it's Steve Dorwood here. So again, I'm really interesting chat. Thanks very much for that. But yeah, I was just asking that question to get a view because I've been asked that recently, and I'm sure I'm going to be asked it again.
Yeah, no, it's a great question and a relevant question, because if you open up ChatGPT and you ask it for a iOS app, it can make something for you. In my experience, it's always that last 10%. It's those client requirements. It's those bugs in production that are tricky to chase down, and having the team that can actually fix them. I think if you use AI to build it, you might struggle. Where I have seen AI work really well is around testing. So finding missing test cases, exploring your app from there, suggesting ways or APIs it could be used better. If you imagine Google and Apple's documentations and thousands of pages, just being able to trawl that and apply it to your code base could work well. But yeah, generative AI depends on what you're building. If you're building a sample app, I'm sure you can do it. My team are pretty good at spotting interview candidates that use AI for their solutions, and sometimes the example is regexes and using them, and how do they work. We've seen those were actually wrong, but they're in the code base and the developers blindly trusted them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, super. Thanks, Tristan. Appreciate it.
I would also just add to that, just in a way, mobile is always a bit behind web. So you probably have the web team. If generative AI is going to replace something, there's more training data on React components, let's say. You already see that with Bolt app and similar. So you'll probably have the trend starting on reducing the team size in your, let's say, web or front-end web teams at the first instance before you see it hit the mobile. But we've used it. I think it's extremely good and useful when you need to learn something new, like Compose or something similar, to just get you started. Makes you faster, definitely. So I personally recommend all engineers to use Gen AI as part of their coding experiences.
I think also a lot of teams, what they're asking for is more automation. So what's slowing you down as a team? Where can you automate it? And some of that is, I've seen recently people talking about open rewrite to update dependencies for backend services, as an example. There's other services where you can look to automate that, I think, and that delivers the value, I guess, that execs are looking for.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tris. So there's a very last question. I think we're close to 2:00, so I'm very appreciative for everyone who joined and asked questions as well. I know it's a Friday afternoon and it's quite sunny here in London, so could be outside having a beer in the pub. That's what I'm going to do later. Thank you so much, Tris. I hope you found this interesting. I think we're going to share the recording later. Am I correct in saying that, Barry? If you're still here.
Yes, mate. Yep, absolutely. Still here, and definitely going to get the recording shared out with everyone afterwards. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you, Barry, as well, for organizing this. It was really joyful. Thank you, Tris, and everyone have a great weekend.